is up, guys? So today is officially day one of the road trip. Brian was supposed to get in last night, but he ended up getting delayed, so he missed his third connection. He spent a night in Toronto, now he's here. But we just want to give you guys a little intro as to what this new series is and what we'll be doing. We're going to be traveling around. We're going to be doing a series called Behind the Lens, so you guys get an in-depth look at a landscape photographer's work, equipment, struggles, hardships, anything that we may deal with. What's up, guys? So for this photo of these rapids, I just want to go over my settings with you guys. So I've got my 16-35mm on. I have an ND1000 on so I can get the long exposure so the rapids will be nice and smooth. And my settings are 8-second shutter, 7.1 f-stop, and ISO of 100. So, Brian picked this up before he flew out to Canada. It's my 16-35 G Master. I've been out of this for 2 months. It broke randomly when we were in Peru, so I didn't have it for Iceland, I didn't have it for Orlando, I didn't have it for Europe, I didn't have it for a ton of jobs. Alright, it seems to work. We'll see. Last time it worked, and it lasted 10 minutes. So first shot back with the G Master. This doesn't need anything special. Just gonna shoot it, proper settings, proper lighting. I don't think I'm gonna need more than one exposure, but I do have a variable polarizer on because there's a little bit too much brightness right here and it kind of takes away from the cabin reflections. So that's pretty much it for the shot. Alright, what's up, guys? So now we're going to do the second portion where I hop right into my computer and you guys can see exactly what I'm doing, how I process these images, and just everything that goes into the editing of these photos that you see on Instagram. This first episode was kind of just an introduction to what we're doing. You know, there weren't really any hardships, there weren't any struggles that we had to overcome, other than Brian's flight path and him getting delayed by having to do a night in Toronto. It was pretty easy, said and done, just a shooting day. Once he got in, we drove up to Yoho National Park, and so I just want to dive in and process 3 of the images that you saw earlier in the video. So first and foremost, I'm going to start with this shot that I took at a natural bridge in Yoho National Park. I think the light is very solid. There's a few parts where the shadows are a bit dark and the highlights are a bit light, but they're not overexposed. But as it stands, I think this is very perfect to just do a single exposure and just some basic editing. So I'll just start off with the same edit I normally do. You know, I drop the highlights, up the shadows, up the whites, down the blacks, and down the contrast. But the white's a little bit too much. I think I blew out some of the highlights. And also, before I forget, I'm going to come down here, remove chromatic aberration, and enable profile corrections. As you can see, I was shooting on my 16-35mm. I'm going to drop these highlights a touch more, bump up the vibrance quite a bit. You can see that made the image a little bit blue and almost purple, so I'll change the white balance accordingly. Make it relatively warm. This was just before sunset. I'll put the tint at 22. I think that's pretty solid. My horizon does look slightly off, so I'll come into the crop tool, grab the ruler, and just double check that that gets fixed. Looks like a little bit too much, so I'll just manually bring that back till I see where I want it. I don't normally touch the tone curve unless I really need to, but I am going to just throw this into Photoshop pretty quickly just to do a few local adjustments. I find it easier to do these in Photoshop opposed to Lightroom. I can normally find selections a lot easier. Lightroom, now that I have this image loaded in Photoshop, I'm always going to make a copy of my background layer, which is just Command J. And that's always just because if I do anything I don't like, I don't ever want it to be on the base layer. I always want it to be on something that I can delete, so I just make a copy of that. And first off, this water down here, it was relatively blue and emerald, so I'm just going to quickly kind of enhance that with a local adjustment. So I'm going to come up to Camera Raw Filter. And when I edit this, I'm only going to be looking at the water opposed to the whole image to see how it looks. I'm just going to bring the hue. That's a little green though. I don't really want green. I want more blue. I think that looks pretty good. I'll see the before and after of just the blue. That looks much better. And now I can just put it on where I want it and not all of the water maybe. So I keep the true nature of it. The rapids are normally always pure white, but like up here where the water is, it should never be pure white. So to do this, I'm going to make a layer mask. I'm going to inverse it, which is Command I, and then I'm going to grab a white brush over here, and because I'm going to be painting on a black layer mask. My opacity is 100, which is fine for me, and the way I'm adjusting the size of the brush is the bracket keys. I'm just going to bring this in where I think it could use a little bit. Again, sorry my computer is moving so slow. Trying to do quite a bit of work because we have been going kind of crazy the last 5 days and we haven't had Wi-Fi or a chance to catch up with really anything or even touch our computers. So that's obviously too much. So I'm going to bring that opacity down, not that much, maybe just right there, and then with a lighter opacity brush I'm going to kind of fade that in a little bit, make that look a little bit more natural. Bring in just a little bit of light blue there, and with a 100% opacity brush I'm going to take out anything I might have went over, like right there, just to make sure we didn't do a sloppy job or anything, but I think it's probably fine. And anytime I do edits like this, typically between every step I'll make a merge visible layer, which is essentially just a layer that pretty much adds everything up under it and makes a fresh layer with all of those edits under it. And that is Command Option Shift E on a Mac. And then I'm probably just going to do one more Camera Raw filter. And in this, I know I want to bring up the yellows in the image. Normally I find with landscapes, if you up the yellows, the whole image gets a really nice vibrance, but it doesn't look oversaturated. Bring that up quite a bit. And just bring it slightly more orange, just a touch though. And then maybe luminance of the blues so the water pops even more. And add maybe just a touch more saturation of the blue. And then I'm gonna use a filter to kind of just darken the sky just a touch. Let me get rid of all these previous edits. And I just wanna lower the exposure a touch and bring up maybe a little bit more warmth into the sky. Let's see. I think that's pretty good. Yeah. And then I think for the bottom, they're just a little bit too dark. So I'm actually gonna up the exposure to the bottom part of the image. Just looks a little too much. Drop the highlights and just really want the shadows mostly. Click OK. And I'm pretty stoked with that as the final image. So I'm going to keep that and just export it as is. Okay, so for this image, I'm going to try to rip through it pretty fast, mainly because I just want to keep these behind the lenses relatively short. You know, I have a whole Photoshop series on editing your photos and Photoshop and things like that, and I'm going to be doing more tutorials as you guys would like. But for now, I really just want to kind of focus behind the lens on in the field type stuff, and then just kind of quickly process photos in each episode for you guys. So for this, I'll probably actually just stick in Lightroom to keep it simple. Again, I'll just start with chromatic aberrations and profile corrections. Again, shooting on my 1635. As you can see, I have some reflections here. I was using the polarizer, but I turned it just to the point where it would have a little bit of glare, but it wouldn't completely take it away, because I did like the reflection of the clouds, but I did want also the shadow of the cabin to be pronounced. So drop the highlights, up the shadows, whites, a little too much. Make that work. Blacks, down the contrast. And if I was to print this photo, I would have had to have taken a double exposure, but for this, I can up the exposure just fine for mainly like social media purposes and stuff like that. So I feel pretty good about those settings. I am going to bring out the ruler again to fix the horizon. That's just a touch too much, so bring it back manually, but that definitely is a lot more even with the horizon. And I'm going to bring up the vibrance just a little bit, but when you have blue skies like this, you have to avoid doing it too much, because it can get very blue very quick. So I'll probably bring up the white balance to balance that out. The shadow's the one more touch down. And then again, I'm probably just going to bring up the yellows, because it does just have a really nice effect on the image as a whole. Maybe even some of the oranges in this. And you can see the before and after with this thing if you just toggle it, clicking it. So my computer is moving extremely slow. I'm going to bring the hue of the blues down a touch, and also the luminance up, because I don't want them to be that blue. And it also helps kind of brighten the photo as a whole, because I did underexpose it. And I'm going to take the spot remover tool in Lightroom, which I do not like even close to the spot remover tool in Photoshop, but just for purposes of this, most of these specs on the camera are rather big, so I can take them out pretty easy in Lightroom. Mainly these are coming up because I was shooting at f7.1, so the higher f-stop you go, the more just kind of crap on your lens is going to show up, even if it's spotless. Get rid of that. And to be honest, I'm pretty happy with that. I bring up the clarity just a little bit, so we pronounce the reflections, maybe the dehaze, and a little bit more warmth. But as a whole, I'm extremely happy with this photo. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Behind the Lens. Like I said, we didn't do too much with the struggles or hardships or any crazy hikes or anything like that. It's a pretty standard day of shooting. Anyways, we have done a lot more stuff since then. We've shot a few more of these that'll be on the way soon. We got a big road trip ahead, about 4 weeks on the road, and just a lot of international travels over the next few months. So if you guys want to stay tuned, just like and subscribe for more, and we got a lot more on the way for you guys. Thank you.